The Hangout on Air is now live. And I feel like I said that weird somehow, but I think it'll be okay. It's live. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Talking about Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Martine.
Tonight we're going to be talking about Survivor Kaoh Rong, Ep09. And I am still confounded by this episode because
it's just a pretty standard middle of the season episode.
This episode, I think part of my reaction is really just first that moves that seem like they should be terrible moves actually pay off and seem like somehow like retroactively it makes it like it's the right move, and yet I feel like I can't fully give them credit for it because it shouldn't have worked. And and I'm mad because it's going well for the people that I like the least at the moment. And not only that, but the people I like the least are corrupting the guy that I like the best.
Yeah. Poor Ty.
Poor Ty. Yeah. Although at the same time, I say poor Ty, except he joined in by the end. Sure, yes. He was led astray by the bad guys, but you know what? If we're going to call Jason and Scott on bad behavior, Ty joins in. And you could almost make a case that doing so against your own better judgment is almost a worse offense.
He was bullied.
Yeah.
That's why they have all that anti-bullying stuff. Because this is the kind of stuff that happens. Nice guys like Ty think that they need to do that to impress people.
Yeah.
Like you could see, like, I'm not even really trying to be funny. Like you could see his decision-making process went through like someone who'd been bullied. Like he initially felt reservation, but didn't say anything. And then they probably said something to him, because remember when they first went out there to do it the first time and he wasn't with them? Mm-hmm. Probably was another conversation that we didn't see about hey, you were supposed to be with us and you didn't do it. And, you're letting us down.
Yeah.
And kind of in a bullying way. And then he's sitting there and he's like, well, I don't want to do this, but I think I need to. So, and then he performs the bad behavior. That's... Mm-hmm. And yes, he should know better, being that he's an adult, but he's in a tough spot.
And it makes, well, again, I want to say that the strategy makes no sense, except that it freaking worked, and that just pisses me off.
It absolutely worked. I have no doubt that them being frustrated and hungry led them to making emotional, irrational decisions, which is what happened on the other side twice.
Yes.
In fact, the person that they voted off because they were emotional and irrational, they did because somebody else was emotional and irrational about them being emotional and irrational.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andrea was the worst in this episode.
Aubrey, you mean?
Aubrey, I'm sorry, Aubrey. Yeah, Aubrey was the worst in this episode because he went gunning for Deb because she was irrational, and it made her irrationally mad that Deb was irrational.
Right, because what we're able to do is read between the lines that in this context, irrational and emotional means doing something different than what I want you to.
Right.
Now,
that's how she defined what Debbie was doing. Yeah, she used the words irrational and emotional, which is how she was behaving.
Right. Well, yes, but at the same time, see, on the one hand, this super idol is just so powerful. Now, technically, a lot of that they didn't know necessarily. So it's a lot of their decisions were made without even really knowing how serious the situation was. So it's but now they've voted out one of their most loyal people without flushing any of the idols.
Well, I'm going to give them a little bit of credit here. Is if you assume they don't know how the super idol works, then some of their decision making makes more sense. Like if they, not that they should have gotten rid of Debbie, but the way, if they knew how powerful the super idol was, they would have made different choices because they would have known it was absolutely could be, not absolutely, because obviously we knew they were willing to pair up, but they might not have known that. It was not 100% that someone would use it to save themselves prior to the vote. So, you know, they're splitting up, and that's what ended up causing the fact that the ability to get rid of Debbie was the split votes, which you don't necessarily do if you are worried about the super idol. Like, you have to think differently, basically.
Right. Well, and the thing is, though,
the best is they didn't have to explain the super idol yet.
Right. They still could have pulled it off, except for Julia throwing a monkey wrench in there, which on the one hand, I want to smack her and say, why when you're in a solid majority, would you want to now join in with the people who are pissing everybody off? But at the same time, what we certainly know now is that they are in a really solid position right now. And if she can stick with them, no one's going to want to give them any money because they've been assholes.
I didn't get on Julia from the beginning. Like, I didn't think that was a poor decision because she didn't.
I only thought it was because she
was on the edge. And so she was trying to figure out, what do I do next? I feel like she talked a lot more confidently than she really felt. I think that's the feeling I got from her. And it's like, well, and I don't think she was really trying to go with them. She was trying to keep her options open, knowing that she was on, or thinking that she was on the bottom of the solid. It's like, and then when it sort of unraveled, and I thought she played it really well, because the way that it unraveled, she ended up in a position where she essentially got to dictate who goes home. And, you know, because there was the Sydney and then the Debbie, and she was a part of both, because which Joe put her in that position by refusing to listen, by just being stubborn, which wasn't a good decision. Like, that's never a good decision to be like, no, I refuse to even listen to your other plan. And they'd be like, all right, then fuck you. We'll go find someone who will.
Well, not to mention what we heard last time in terms of the interview from Nick, where he basically says that Jason would have gone out the time before, except that they felt like we won't be able to get Joe to change his mind. And so now everyone's just confused and we have to switch it.
Right. So Joe is not playing a good game.
No.
He's messing up everybody in his alliance because he refuses to do anything different, except he's oddly stubborn because he keeps saying, no, we just need to stick to the plan. Well, that's not working because everyone else is not sticking to the plan, Joe. You need to stop saying that because no one's listening to you.
Right. The thing is, it's like steadfastly sticking to one plan when it starts to become clear that it's fracturing is not, that you can't just hold it in place by force of will unless you are the one that's out there trying to talk to the people who are wavering. Like, he's not like doing that. He's just letting them approach him with the different options and then saying no.
That's how he was treating it, though. Like, he was like, oh, you want to talk to me about that? No, I'm not going to do that. Never going to do that. And it's like, that doesn't mean they're just going to do what you want. They're just going to go find someone else who will. So it ended up, so this is why I give Julia credit, because I didn't feel like she was trying to go with them. I think she was trying to play this, you know, which is a very tough thing to play.
Well, okay, I'll agree with you that she wasn't trying to just go with them. She wanted to play it both ways. But what I'm saying is she failed from the get-go to do that because Aubrey immediately stopped trusting her 100% as soon as she decided to join their team in the challenge.
Except that it did end up working because they were willing to work with her. And
well, but see, that's my whole point, is that something that should have been a mistake turned out through dumb luck to work out okay.
That she did win an immunity.
Yes, but again, it's like so dumb luck and winning an immunity. So, but that almost even proves my point, is that she was the target until she won immunity because of what she had done at the reward challenge.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I'm trying to give her a little more. I feel like I'm just giving her more credit than you are, but not. And it ends up making it sound like I'm arguing that she did this phenomenal job. I think she did well once she got herself in that situation. I feel like, and the things started to fall in her favor. She navigated it fairly well.
Yeah, and to some extent, I'll accept too that I sort of built this narrative in my head that people were making bad decisions that worked out through good fortune rather than because it was actually a good move or good strategy. And I was kind of lumping her in with that and trying to force it to fit that narrative when it's not going to be a perfect fit in every case. But to a large extent, I feel like when she did that at the reward challenge and then in confessional was talking like, oh yeah, I'm still just keeping my options open, I'm thinking, no, you just made a really big decision that flagged to everybody that you were changing your allegiance. You are not keeping your options open. You have just switched sides, period. Right. And so to try to play it like that's not what happened was a mistake.
I totally agree with you on that, because I think that while the decision to go and join their team for the reward challenge was not a bad decision on her part because of where she was in the chain, it would be good to at least go find out what those guys are about. Like, let me just see, and let me just see if they're open to working with me in the future. Let me just see. But to jump to it, and I don't think that was an editing thing, because it clearly set off Aubrey.
Yeah, Aubrey was the one that had the strongest initial.
I don't know. I keep thinking her name's like Andrea, but yeah, Aubrey. But she clearly
Sydney too was also really.
Sydney and Aubrey, like, they were right on it. So it must have been as instantaneous as it felt in the edit. Where what she could have done is let them, say, okay, well, who's going to go, and say, you know what, someone's got to go. I'm willing to do it.
Yeah.
And just said it with a little bit more demure, as opposed to, I'll do it. I'll go over there. Because it sounded like, I'll go over there and work with them now.
And it really felt that way. And so I felt as soon as she did that, it's like, Julia, what are you doing? Because at that point, even though I guess I'd kind of temporarily forgotten how powerful the fact that both Jason and Ty have idols could have been, I was thinking, these guys are on the outs. What are you doing, Julia? You're in the majority right now. You guys have the strength of numbers. What are you doing? And I guess I just was kind of temporarily forgetting how powerful that could be. Except that I feel like I can't give her credit for that because I don't think she knew that. But at the same time, ultimately, obviously, right now, given how everything played out, was a really good decision because it worked out. But so if we're going only by like what the end result was, rather than what did we think was the most likely outcome based on the time she made the decision, I feel like it was a bad move that worked out as opposed to it was a good strategic decision.
See, and I just fall a little bit to the other side where I think it was a good move to try that was poorly executed that ended up working out even though it was poorly exceeded.
Yeah.
And there was one other thing about it, though, that I want to bring up since we're talking about that.
Sure.
When Sydney's reaction, when I watched it and I rewound it, and it's not 100% sure, but it looks like Sydney is starting to raise her hand when Julia says, "I'll do it." And I rolled back, and it wasn't, I don't know if she was like going to just like touch her hair, or if she was going to ask a question, or if he was going to volunteer because she actually was going to try to repair her old alliance and do the same thing. And so when Julia did it, that's why she like latched onto it and was like, oh, well, I was actually wanting to do that. And she went and did that. So she must be thinking the same thing I was thinking.
Yeah, that could be, there could be something to that. Or, or even it could have also been that she was planning to volunteer, but do it the way that we kind of talked about, maybe a different way that Julia should have handled it, which was to sort of make it more a matter of, well, I know we want to try to have the teams be this split, so someone has to join them, and I'm willing to do it, but to like coordinate with the rest of the team about it rather than just kind of just jumping ship. And so
I think she would handle it better, but I bet she.
Yeah.
My feeling is that she didn't like the fact that these were people who were her friends that she betrayed and were now acting up, and she, whether it was for strategic or just emotional and personal reasons, wanted to just go back and work with them another time. And when Julia jumped to it, she was kind of like doubly taken aback. Like, not only why is Julia doing that, but then thinking, well, this is how I was thinking, so clearly that's what she's thinking.
Yeah, there could be some projection there.
Yeah, and she doesn't have the ties to it, so she's clearly just wanting to jump ship, you know.
Yeah.
And
well, I could definitely see too, though, that whether or not she really had anything in mind about repairing that bond, having been the previously been the closest girl to that alliance because she was the only, Braun girl remaining, and having decided to split, she would be all the more sensitive to the idea that someone, because Julia, like, switching over is like taking her place that she had left.
It kind of is like that now, too.
Yeah, it is. And so
it's kind of exactly like that.
Yeah. Yep. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning, and we have an interesting scene where Ty is kind of panicking about his vote for Jason, and I think he just straight up lies and said that he didn't, and says that he voted for Debbie.
It was the start of his downfall. No, he lied before. He lied when he was looking for the idol.
Yeah, so it was not the first time he's been dishonest, but certainly he's now lying to the people that he is specifically in alliance with now.
Right.
Which I don't know that it's going to come back to bite him at this point, because I think everyone was so confused. And like, we even talked about how his vote for Jason made no sense, and we had to kind of get some inside info as to how that might have possibly worked. And so he might well just completely be able to get away with it because, unless everybody goes through some sort of an interrogation to really nail down who it could have been, there certainly seemed like there would be other likely possibilities for who might throw a vote Jason's way.
Yeah.
So in any case, he's already off balance now, because he is already sensing that he's now sort of officially throwing in his lot with these guys out of strategic convenience, namely him having an idol, Jason having an idol, the two of them knowing about each other's idols, and therefore the possibility of the super idol. Like, to Ty's credit here, that is too big an opportunity to leave on the table. Even if you would rather not be allied with these two guys, you can't leave that alone. That's too powerful a possible move to risk, to leave that on the table just so you can go with the majority, because you can overturn the majority. But he is already kind of feeling some discomfort there and some anxiety, because because of how that played out, he was forced to lie to them. But anyway, the three of them plot, and then they talk about deciding to sabotage the girls, and Ty's uncomfortable with it, but he's not going to stop them. Scott and Jason take the tools, and my note here is, it's not clear what they hope to accomplish with this plan. And it's like, one of the things that is a recurring theme in this podcast is the idea that people come up with rationalizations for why whatever it is that they wanted to do in the first place is good strategy.
Yes.
And I 100% think that's what's happening here. I don't feel like this is really coming from a place of You know, this is really kind of petty behavior, and I'm uncomfortable with that. But strategically, it's so much to our benefit to have everybody else be mad that we're willing to take the hit in order to make that happen. Like,
Except it worked.
Except that it worked, and that's why it drives me bonkers. And like,
it made everybody else make irrational, emotional decisions.
Yeah,
because they were tired and hungry and angry, and so they just made decisions based on that, not based on logic.
Now, like, while I'll give them,
and they ended up not even voting for the people who have the friggin' super idol. They didn't even put a vote on them.
Right? Yeah, they didn't even make them play any of those idols.
No,
like.
Well, in the way that they had it set up, it wouldn't have, if they had voted for any of them, they would have played both idols. They had to, because they would have had to use it as a super idol. Because
and sure, they might have lost one of their number because the idol allowed them to offset the votes, but then the idols are out of play. But what they did is they instead volunteered to vote off one of their own number and not flush the idols. I was watching this going, what are you doing?
Right, and now if they can go and recruit Julia back and just say, hey, thanks for voting out Debbie. I know you didn't vote with us, but we don't care because we have the super idol and we need somebody. Then they're 4-4 with a super idol.
Yeah.
And now you got nothing. You've got nothing.
Yeah, you're doomed at that point because nobody's going to dare vote against the super idol. This was the only time where they could have done something about it, because if they could have stuck with the original 6 against 3, we're going to split the vote, so it'll be 3-3-3. If they could have managed to make that happen, then it doesn't matter. They can play the super idol and it's still just a tie. They would invalidate the votes against one person. And then the rest of them vote for the other person. Like, they could have done it, but they no longer have the numbers to do it. Like, obviously, Julia's switch makes that problematic, but there's an element, I think, to which the problem was that they splintered into the two extremes instead of taking the middle ground. Right? So what we had is Sydney and Aubrey immediately thinking of Julia. Oh, she's lost to us, completely untrustworthy. We have to get her out. Right. Versus Debbie saying, what are you guys talking about? She's just playing them. She's still really with us. Instead of them coming together and saying, we need to win Julia back. We think she might be joining them. We need to get her to come back and still be with us.
Right. And this... this whole decision-making tree that they went through here, particularly in Aubrey, it's part of what was the downfall of the Brains tribe in the past. Is, yes, she was smart enough to figure out that Julia was looking at both sides. But what the better decision would be is, okay, let's not trust Julia 100%. But clearly Julia feels like she's on the bottom. So let's go make her, like the Boston Rob thing would make Julia feel like she's actually in the inner circle. And that's where he was good, because he was smart, but he also had that charisma. And he would think, okay, well, if I can't get what I want out of this, if this person isn't about to do what I want, how do I befriend them and make them feel like they don't need to go make that decision?
Right.
And that's that would have been the smart move. Like, if they had just, like, there was no guarantee that Julie was like, yeah, she was exploring it, but as you said, is it truly advantageous for her to go join them to get rid of Sydney? I mean, maybe she makes that decision, but she likely sticks with the 3-3-3 and lives to fight another day and knows that, she's made some bonds with the guys, and whichever one leaves goes, but if she needs to work with them later, she can. If she doesn't, then she needs to strengthen her bond on her side. So if you make it feel like, and you don't, and not disingenuously, you don't go like, oh, Julie, you're not on the bottom. Don't worry about that. Like, you're totally in the top 3. Like, but go just befriend her and be like,
win her back.
Win her back without saying you're trying to win her back.
Yeah.
Just go over and be like, so, what are you thinking? Who do you want to get out? Like, ask her opinion. and say, and they're like, oh, so-and-so, and be like, well, what are you thinking for your ideal top three? And, she'll say, she's obviously going to include whoever it is that's talking, like people know how to do that.
Well, and
that's actually a really smart top three. I could be down with that,
Acknowledge that we understand why you might be considering going with them, but here's the case for why we don't think you should. And rather than
just
two extremes, which is she's the enemy now versus what are you guys talking about? She's fine. We're going to continue to tell her everything we know.
Well, because she didn't recognize her as the enemy, and the enemy has immunity. She's the new target. Like, what is that nonsense?
No, it's yeah. They played right into Scott and Jason's hands.
She should have just walked when she shouldn't have done it to begin with. And then when Julia immunity, she should have again, we're armchairing it, but this doesn't feel like this is that hard of a decision to make in the moment if you're not feeling irrational, is to say, okay, that's not going to work out. So I guess we should just stick to the original plan and knock out the idols and then move on. And then if we feel like dealing with Julia next time, we can, because then we'll even have more of a majority to do it.
Yeah.
Or if we stick to the original plan, well, I guess they couldn't guarantee Julia was going to be a part of it.
See, that's the problem. They would no longer be able to split the votes if they can't count on Julia.
Right.
But what that does is that makes the risk that whoever the other side is going to target probably just goes home, and they are the price that you pay for getting rid of the idols. But
what my point
nobody wants to risk that.
Yeah, I feel like this was my point last week, is that I want to see more of that. Stop screwing around with that stuff. Go get the person you want out, and if they happen to have the idol, fair play. One of you goes. Instead of getting stuck in this weird oh shit, I didn't realize all these people were conspiring against me. No, get everybody aligned. Go after the person you want out, and if you get screwed, you get screwed. But it makes it a lot harder for someone to kind of tinker around on the fringe. And to say, okay, well, if you're 3-3-3-3, and we're gonna force this tie, and then we'll vote for that person. It's you better be damn sure, right? Because all it takes is one person at that point, and then you're rolling the dice. So you're basically rolling the dice the same. The odds are the same.
Right. It was going to be 6-3, and you lost Julia. So sure, you can't still split the vote and have it be 3-3-3, but you can still do 5-4. And you can force at least one of the idols to be played. And hopefully, if you try to engineer it properly, what you can do, especially if you are pretty sure that Julia is going to tell the other side, what your plan is, if, let her think that you're still planning to try to split the vote. And if you no longer trust her, let her tell them that.
That's how you engineer it. You tell Julia, here, we're splitting the vote. We're doing 3-3-3. Here's the deal.
Yeah. And then in the meantime, you say,
and you vote for the one person who you haven't told her you're splitting between.
Yeah.
Because the best case scenario for you at that point is both idols go, because neither wants to be the one who ends up having to go into the revote. And it doesn't matter because all 5 of your votes went to the person. And now, in the situation, that wouldn't have mattered, but they didn't know that. And
but anyway, so we got lots this episode of just them behaving badly, not just hiding the tools, but then not even just pouring water on the fire once, but essentially promising to continue to do it, let them rebuild it and then just pour it out again. That's just infuriating to me. And the fact that it worked, I keep saying it pisses me off because it does, because I don't like it's unpleasant to watch. It makes me really dislike them. And I think that whatever short-term gains resulted from it, namely making the others act irrationally,
they can't win.
now they can't win. Nobody's going to give them any money. It's like you're the most poor sport ever. You like, what kind of competitor are you that you are willing to take that sort of an action? Like, nobody's going to want to vote for you to win.
Yeah, you can't win. This was a short-term victory, not a long-term one. And
yeah, and so it was very frustrating to have it not immediately karmically punished. But in any case,
remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like, just like they can't win, you as a viewer, they can't win. So don't get too worked up over it, because they can't win.
Well, but what that potentially means, though, is that other people who maybe deserve it more or could win might be eliminated in the process. And so our end result is going to be choosing between people. Like, at this point, what if it's, Ty, Jason, and Scott make it all the way to the final three, and then we have to choose between them? Like, I mean, I like Ty better than the other two, but at the same time, he's guilty now of this same kind of behavior, even if he was pressured into it rather than liking it.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't boldly say they can't win, but I don't think that they can. I think the only person they could probably beat at this point might be, because people would be like, you know what?
You kind of cut out when you said the name, so I don't know who you said.
Joe.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I could see everybody going back to Ponderosa and talking about it and being like, and identifying the same thing we did, is that, you know what? If Joe wasn't so damn stubborn, like, we wouldn't have to keep involving people that we didn't want to involve, which only made things tricky for us.
Yeah.
And like, he was so stubborn, I don't want him to win either.
Yeah. Although in this particular context, like, him being stubborn is an ongoing problem, but it's also true that they were the ones trying to now change the vote to one of their own, which is what we've been decrying as stupid.
Right, but it comes back to, this is my theme with this episode. It's not necessarily, well, it is a little bit. Some of the things that they were suggesting were irrational and emotional, and that was part of what happened. Mm-hmm. Some of the things were poorly executed, but it's, my feeling with this comes back to, which again is one of the reasons we love this show, is the social engineering of this. Mm-hmm. It's the way that people are treating each other that is causing a lot of these problems, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So Joe being like, I'm putting my foot down and I'm not even going to listen to you, because that is not what I am going to do. Mm-hmm. I am just going to do this blindly, whether anybody else is continuing to do it or not. That's not the way to approach it. Joe should understand, well, shit, obviously there's a problem here. Why don't I figure out a little bit more about why they want to do that, so I can convince them that that is not the right thing to do, and we should stick. Just saying stick to the plan and actually convincing people to stick to the plan are two very different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this game is, like, the reason it's so difficult is because you have to walk a very fine, razor-thin line between being flaky and making moves for no reason other than paranoia versus being able to be adaptable to changing facts on the ground. You know, you can't, going too far to either side will ruin you. And he wants to just dig his feet in and say, nope, this is the plan, I'm not going to move. And everyone else is like, we have to move. The original plan was based on counting on Julia's vote, and we can't do that anymore. The original plan will fail now. So we can't just do that still. Now, okay, if you don't want to do this new plan we're proposing, what's your alternative? We can't just continue to do the old one because it won't work anymore.
Right. And he could have then been the voice of reason and said, well, my alternative is, because that plan was good and we haven't completely lost Julia, let's
get her back.
Let's go get her back. Because clearly Debbie feels strongly that she's still on board. Mm-hmm. she doesn't have. Let's go show her the reasons why moving to them is a bad idea, and let's win her back so that we can trust her, or let's change the votes if we don't feel confident in that. You know, he's talked about how he's a friggin' expert in spotting liars. Like, make an effort to win Julia back, and then let him like quiz her if she's gonna vote with them. You know, like, use those assets, like do something other than just these bizarre, like, you know, no, I refuse to vote for Debbie. Okay. Yep. Refuse.
Yeah.
So you're going to do what you were planning on doing. Okay. Well, we refuse to. Now I guess we have to go work with Julia. And that's what was so weird. Julia changing her mind is what prompted them to tell Joe that they wanted to vote for Debbie. And then Joe refusing to listen to them. They were so stubborn now in their own thing of we have to get rid of Debbie that they went to include Julia in the vote to get rid of Debbie. Like, the whole way it snowballed was so bizarre.
Well, and there's this moment where Aubrey is kind of saying, isn't this ironic that the person that I wanted to go is now who I have to win over to my new plan? And I'm like, maybe you want to look at that as a red flag of some kind?
Yeah. Take a step back, girl. Like, think about that. Maybe.
Like, remember why it is that you're now thinking you want to vote out Debbie. Because she trusted Julia. So now you're going to trust Julia in order to vote out Debbie?
For trusting Julia.
Yeah. That's not... Yeah. So...
and that's what, like, I feel like of all of the poor playing and bad decisions and even the things I didn't like, I was most frustrated with Joe and with Aubrey.
Yeah, Aubrey was kind of put herself in the driver's seat in this episode and steered them into a wall.
Yes.
And now, admittedly, I think we have to at least give her the credit that she was really in a tough spot. It was actually a really difficult situation, and I think that they were in a case where, like, the best case plan, even now with us kind of talking through it, knowing what we know, the best case plan still included a substantial risk that one of them would go home and it would be whoever the other side decided they wanted to vote for.
And I'm still not convinced that that's such a bad thing. Like,
well, no, I agree from our perspective, but the problem is that when you have your five that's trying to make this decision, nobody wants to be the one who's at risk. And if you feel like, I think that the other side is going to want to target me, just because this is the best decision for the five of us collectively doesn't mean it's the best decision for me as a person. Because if I think I'm going to be the one to go, then any other plan is better.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. Nobody wants to be the one, but because none of them are willing to even take the risk, they ended up with worst case scenario for all of them. Well, not, I guess, worst case, but certainly they kicked that problem down the road so that now they're going to have to deal with that next time. And we also lost one of our people.
It, once again, we've talked about this numerous times, that, you should understand game theory at least on a surface level before you play Survivor, because what you just described there is the prisoner's dilemma. And that if both prisoners choose what is ostensibly best for them, there is a worst case scenario for both prisoners.
Yeah.
And so it's just proven again. The other interesting thing that I thought when I was watching this, which I don't know, just because it kind of flows with what we're talking about, is when Aubrey, after the immunity challenge, gets so upset in her confessional, is like, well, the whole plan I had made and the one person that I had wanted to go home won immunity. So now what am I going to do? And I was watching it with my fiance, who's, again, not as much into Survivor as we are by any means. She kind of comes in and out, and she goes, I don't understand why you would make a plan for one person prior to the immunity challenge. And I was like, that's a pretty good point. Especially, you shouldn't have only one option when there is an immunity for one person.
Yeah. Especially when that one person that you're talking about is only the target because you think that they're probably going to join with the other people that you already wanted out.
Right. So there's not like
they considered joining the other side, you have to target them. Like,
it's not like of the Scott, Jason tie, Scott was our number one plan and he won immunity. So we have to shift to Jason. Like, because you made your plan with somebody that was only in one particular scenario. But yeah, you shouldn't have gotten yourself all worked up about that one thing before immunity. Like, I thought that was a great point. Like, you got to think through that. Like, how did that never enter their mind to say, okay, we're going for Julia. What if Julia wins immunity? What do we do? If you want to be making that planning, you have to consider that.
Yeah, I think Aubrey is, first of all, I continue to see in her, I feel like the way she's playing is probably the way I would end up playing if I was there. Just knowing myself, I suspect that the sort of thing that she's doing is what I would end up doing, which is making emotional decisions, but blind to the fact that that's what's driving them. So you can put a veneer of rationality and strategy over what is at heart an emotional decision and not realize what's happening, not realizing the fault in your internal logic. And I think that's what she's doing.
I can definitely see that, because I could also see you to further the comparison, to be smart enough to recognize these things that are like going on, but not be able to process them like in that situation in a rational way. Like, she was right. Julia was looking to look at an alternative, and Debbie wasn't listening to her.
Yeah.
Like, the things that bring the start of it required insight and intuitiveness on her part. Her reaction to them was incorrect.
Right. Because Debbie challenged her on it. Yeah. Yeah, that she dug in, and she had to not only prove that she was right, and then when that was taken off the table, it's like, well, now I have to attack the person who challenged me. Yeah.
Well, because that's how the decision tree works on when you have a plan and that person wins immunity. So let's take a step back and let's say the plan is Scott or Jay, or the plan is all Scott, because Scott's the guy who put out the fire, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Scott wins immunity. Oh, shit, the guy we wanted to vote for won immunity. So who would we vote for? Well, we slide to the other enemy, basically, Jason. This is the same decision-making process. Well, Julia was against us, and Debbie wouldn't listen, so we're going to get rid of Julia at Debbie's, and Debbie's not going to have any say in that. Well, Julia won immunity, so where does the vote slide? Well, the vote slides to the other person in that equation. So even though they're not partner, well, they kind of were partner, because they were the ones that were like, oh yeah, we're still all together. So it makes sense how it happened. But even though it was wrong, like, I think that was the fun part of this episode. Is like, I got why everybody did what they did. Like, I get why Joe didn't want to vote for Debbie.
Yeah.
I thought he handled it terrible.
Well, we talked about that already. It's another example in this episode of being right for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Everybody, like, I get why Jason and Scott had sort of thrown their hands up and were like, what do we have left in our bag? Well, we're kind of mad at them, so I guess we'll just go fuck them. Like, but you get that.
Sow chaos and hope to mix up the current status quo,
So you understand where they're coming from. You get that, okay, Julia isn't in the most secure alliance of the majority, so you get why she would want to explore, what do I do once the minority goes, or do I want to shift before the minority goes and put myself in a different position? Totally understandable. Like, everything that everyone did, I get. It was just so bizarre how they were treating each other and how they were interacting, and like the decisions that they were making. It was
well, and besides, you know, like even Julia's whole thing of like she's feeling on the outside of this 6, and so so that's why she might be tempted to switch. But at the same time, I feel like that is a loose 6 with very little in the way of a really cohesive core to it, versus switching and becoming number 4 to a very tight 3. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, at the same time, you know, it's if you know, feeling like you have a much better chance to get yourself to that 4.
Or she was without, you know, applying the label to it because of how big it became last season. It's essentially the voting block thing.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that I really
gets me farther this time.
Yeah, I really just feel like I am reluctant to give her the benefit of the doubt, because if she just made the decision to switch and then owned it, then I would give her more credit for a strategic decision, even if she tried to play it to everybody else like she was still having it both ways. But in the confessional, it made it sound like she really still considered it, having her options open. So I feel like she made this move without recognizing what actual impact that it had. And so I don't feel like I can give her credit for the move, even if, or I can't give her credit for having really thought the move through carefully and making a good decision. Because I think that she didn't think she was making a decision. She thought she was, well, let's keep this open over here.
All right. I didn't want to evoke this, but I think we probably should, like, acknowledge she's a kid.
Yeah. Well, no,
that method of social engineering works in college. Like, that's exactly how she's used to behaving. Like,
I totally.
So, well, we can sit back and say, like, okay, that's not the right decision, and we both agree. In her mind, you can see why it all came together that way if you put yourself in the shoes of a 20-year-old.
I can totally understand it, but my point is, given that I think that's what drove her decision-making process, I can't give her the credit for making a smart strategic decision, because I don't think that's what actually happened.
I agree. I wasn't trying to say she made a smart strategic decision. I was saying that my point was that I understand why people felt like they should do what they ended up doing. I just didn't agree with what their choice, like what the precursor was to the decision making. I get the actual decision that came out of it. I don't agree with most of the decisions that came out of this episode, and that's kind of the entertaining thing for me about watching this one. Is like, okay, I get. Again, to go back, I get why Joe's stubborn. I get why Scott wants to put out the water. I get why Julia wants to go see what they're doing. I get why Aubrey's mad at Julia, and I get why then Aubrey's mad at Debbie. I get all of that. I get it. The way they handled it was a cluster.
Yeah, this is like, I think we've talked about seasons in the past. Like, I feel like in the last several seasons, there's been several seasons where we had a lot of good players making smart moves. This season, I feel like everybody's dumb. Or, not dumb like as in they're a dumb, stupid person, but everyone is playing poorly.
They're playing poorly, and that's the thing. They're not dumb because...
Well, playing poorly is what I mean.
Right. They're identifying the right thing they're just making a bad decision and a bad play after that. So they're smart enough to see it, but they're not smart enough to execute from what they see.
I came up with the weirdest analogy, and I don't even know if this is going to make any sense, but let me try it out and just to see. Like, so imagine a parking lot, just like at an office park or something like that, and the normal routine would be that it gets mostly full. Let's say it gets 85% full on a normal day, and then somehow in secret, when nobody's there, they go in and repaint all of the lines so that there's more total spaces, but each individual space is 8 inches narrower.
This sounds like it sucks.
And I just feel like the next day, the response of people just trying to drive in and park, it would be chaos, and people would be upset and frustrated and but maybe not even quite figuring out what was wrong. I don't know. Maybe that's overstating it, but I guess what was leading to that is just this feeling like somehow something about this season just has everybody. Maybe it's just the specific chemistry of all of these specific people in this environment have just got everything just out of phase just a little bit, so that making the right argument doesn't quite get you all the way to where you're trying to actually go. I don't know. That's a bad.
You got to pick your analogy though, and I'm thinking more of okay, you're the person in charge of the parking lot,
mm-hmm.
and the parking lot is 85% full, but you're getting a lot of complaints because people they feel like there's not enough good parking.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're having to park really far away. So what you decide to do is to narrow all the spaces by 8 inches so that everyone will end up being parking closer to the building.
Mm-hmm.
And then the chaos that you talked about ensues. That decision-making of, well, this is clearly the solution to the problem of people complaining about parking, is
mm-hmm.
how I feel like these people are deciding on this season.
Right.
It's like they recognize that that there's an issue there. It's not a serious one, but there is a real issue because people are unhappy about the parking situation.
Right.
And yet you make a decision that doesn't actually help the situation. While if you remove human emotion from it, it should help the situation.
Right.
People are saying, I'm not close enough to the building. So you move everybody 8 inches so the last person to arrive is parking closer to the building. But the reality of what happens is absolute chaos.
You have people who are not used to having to park super precisely, ending up making it so someone else can't get their door open, and then that person's pissed off, and maybe they leave it in an awkward spot, and then people feel like they should be able to park wherever they used to park instead of having to go find another spot where it's not already too tight.
Right, so they park in the middle of 2 spaces, and then somebody gets their door jammed because all the parking spaces are smaller, or somebody parks a big SUV in there, and then nobody can park near them. And
someone spills the soda all over their shirt because they can't get out of their car properly.
Right. So what you've done is, while creating a solution to the problem that wasn't even really that big of a problem, you ended up engineering all these new problems.
Yeah.
And
so we're doing a lot of work to try to fix my random analogy, but
moving your random analogy into the decision making of the person who decided to move all those spaces, that's what the season is like. They're making decisions like that person, and the result of what happened.
Yeah. So what we really just have, just to strip the analogy out of it, is we have people who are making decisions that seem like you can explain the logic of it, but somewhere between the plan and the actual end result, nobody is quite getting the traction that they expected. and nothing is working out quite the way it seems like it should in the plan, and yet people are not adapting very well.
But all of that is due to the genius of Scott and Jason of messing up camp.
Oh, see, exactly. Except that I still feel like
I'm just winding you up now.
I know. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, okay. So anyway, we've talked a lot about some of the other stuff. Let's try to at least zip through some of these other points we haven't really talked about.
Let's do it.
When we get to the reward challenge, first of all, I like Chinese takeout as a reward to offer. I think that's just a fun one. And then having it be this whole setup where whoever's going to be the extra is not just sitting out, but they get to sort of bet which team is going to win and join them. I think I like that aspect of it. But then also this idea of spontaneously allowing them to just assign their own teams instead of doing the schoolyard pick is interesting. And even though, we've talked a lot already about
Jeff Probst's awesomeness.
Well, I was going to say the wisdom of Julia's decision to switch teams.
I know.
But to be sure, the whole thing became a much more exciting and interesting outcome because they didn't do a schoolyard pick, because he made this opportunity for drama available to the people.
Yes. We should have mentioned that much earlier, is that Jeff's adjustment to the script here prompted a lot of what happened.
Yeah, imagine if it had just been a schoolyard pick and these teams had been random. It would have the whole outcome of the episode might have been different. Joe volunteers to sit out before anyone even asks him. He seems like he was really quick to to volunteer for that, which is fine. But it just seemed like he just jumped right on that before anyone else could volunteer.
Yep.
And then, this my note when Julia volunteers to join the other team and then defends it as a move in confessional. And then in my note, I just wrote shakes head sadly. But we kind of talked through that. Certainly, though, as it happened, my assumption was this is a terrible mistake she's making. That was my feeling about it when it happened. And then, honestly, like the challenge was reasonably close. Like the guys did pull ahead, but it was semi-close by the end. You know what I mean? It's like, probably another.
It's a good challenge designed to be like that because you can knock down the bulk of them very quickly. It's the last few that take a while.
Yeah. Right. Debbie actually did pretty well, though. Just from how far back she started, she really closed the gap pretty well, even if they ultimately didn't win. So coming back from the challenge, Aubrey immediately declares Julia an enemy of the state, whereas Jason talks about Julia has them trucking back up the mountain. And boy, I have this weird, I don't want to even, the phrase that was coming to mind was love, hate thing, but that's not what I even mean. I have this weird sort of visceral dislike of Jason at this point, just because I feel like he's a jerk. But at the same time, there's these glimpses occasionally of like the human being inside the jerk. And it messes with my little BS detector system. You know what I mean? It's like when he was talking about his autistic daughter, the other episode, and then this one where he's just so happy that, hey, we thought we were doing really bad. Now things are kind of going all right again. And it's like, he just seems like there's some joy there in the way he's talking. And at the same time that I'm feeling like, I don't like you. Stop having humanity. You're forcing me to have some empathy for you, and it's pissing me off. Stop it. In any case. This is where Julia, though, is still really seems to think that she's just going to easily be able to just make her own decision in which way she's going, and it's just up to her to decide. let's see here, though. This is also, or it was around this bit where Ty turns to the dark side and also poured the fire out, even though he didn't take credit for doing it. Like, Scott did it in front of everybody, and then Ty did it when nobody was watching and let everyone think it was Scott again.
Yes, that was the funniest part, is that everybody just blamed Scott.
Yeah.
Not that it's okay. It was funny.
Well, and certainly, I mean, Ty gets the credit with Scott and Jason, at least in the sense that, they would know that they didn't do it. And so Ty, they would believe Ty, presumably, when he says, yes, I did it. And probably they would even be fine with the idea of, because to some extent, even though I think it was actually sort of a late addition to their strategy rationalization, the idea that they want to act out so negatively so as to draw votes to themselves so that they could use the idol. Again, I don't think that was part of the plan to begin with, but I think it is what built into it later.
Right.
And Aubrey, actually, despite all her other failings, picked up on that. But at the same time, as a result, I can see why Scott and Jason would not mind at all having Scott take the blame for Ty doing it and still give Ty credit for helping, despite having previously expressed reservations about the whole idea.
Yes. And I just remember watching him do it is what sort of prompted that whole bullying thing for me.
Yeah.
And that he looked like a bad little kid that was doing something that he knew he shouldn't be doing, and was just he had this whole posture of I don't know, it was just weird.
Well, you could see that it was still making him uncomfortable, and it's more like, I have to show my commitment to these guys because I've thrown my lot in with them, and I don't see really any other reasonable way to go at this point. I'm not sure I want to do some other alliance, and in order to stay strong with this alliance, I have to help forward the strategy that they have set.
Yes.
But he seemed like he felt bad enough about it, and that's part of the reason I'm hoping that next time maybe they will successfully be able to lure him away from them, especially now that he's the one that has both of those idol pieces, officially and formally. If they could convince him, what are you doing with those guys? They're making you into someone that you're not. Do you really want to go to the end with them? Think about how they make you feel. Think about how they make you act. Is that the way you want to play this game?
That I 100% agree with you. It's exactly why I was making those points earlier about he felt like he was being bullied. He had this posture like he knew he shouldn't be doing it. Whether or not he ultimately makes that decision next time, it's left that opening. Now, your other point, though, Jason would be smart to say, I'd like my half the idol back now when they get back to camp, and we'll do this again another time. I think he has every right to do that, and I think he should.
Yeah. What I will actually, I'll go ahead and right now give Jason and Scott total unequivocal credit for. Like a lot of the stuff that they did, I feel like they sort of backed into a strategy that worked out for them. But what I will give them credit for is all the showmanship regarding the idol at the tribal council was expertly done. And even though obviously they were having fun with the whole thing, I think that confusion that resulted from all that stuff they were doing was exactly what they intended, and it worked really well. So even though I still don't like those guys or the way they're playing generally, I have to give credit that it was a good idea to do it, and they did it well. That was an example of something where they actually planned something and then did it well, and it worked the way they intended.
Well, better than they intended.
Yeah.
that's sort of the way this is going. Like the things that shouldn't work for you are, and the things that should work for you are working better than expected. Like that should have
worked
for
them anyway. Yeah.
For now.
For now. Especially again, given that what we're talking about, and we sort of said this already, but it bears repeating. It's working because they've made a short-term investment that is going to hurt them in the long run. Yes, the uncertainty that they created with their sabotage, the bad feeling and everything, it did produce a result that advanced their current position, but at the cost of making everybody hate them. Or not everybody. And it's also quite possible that some people will forgive them, especially if they're able to really own it later. But it's still really risky.
But there's also the point that, I wasn't bringing into it earlier until you now mentioned it, is that there's potential that this bites them in the ass well before that, because they gave the idol to Tai.
Yeah.
So if they didn't get the other half back from him and they left him with both, now Tai is in the super idol position and he can do whatever he wants, which is what basically happens when you have the super idol. Like nobody can vote for you ever. Like,
yeah,
it karmically could fuck him next time, because everybody's going to hate him, including Tai, and he's going to have the super idol and he's going to hate that they did that to him, and he's going to make a decision to get rid of him. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the potential exists because of what they did this time.
Yeah.
They will always be at risk,
So before the immunity challenge, we also got the bit here where it was really strong that Debbie was really resistant to the idea of targeting Julia, saying, no, we need to do everything we can to try to get one of the guys out first. But because she was steadfastly insisting on trusting Julia, which we can acknowledge, Aubrey was right that they can't just trust Julia. But that's where Aubrey came to the conclusion that Debbie was operating emotionally, and therefore any argument that she made could be disregarded as a result.
Aubrey emotionally came to that conclusion.
Yes. Because it's one thing to say, Debbie's wrong about this. It's another thing to say, because she's emotional, I don't have to listen to her anymore. But so then we had the immunity challenge. It's a pretty standard but enjoyable, balanced thing. It's very interesting to watch just because of the possibility to have everything go horribly wrong, even when it seems like you're ahead, either by tripping on the little frame and knocking everything over, or just by having your dominoes not work the way they should.
You know how there's times where you say, like, you look at some challenges and you say, oh, I wish I was on Survivor and I could do that. Blah, blah.
Yeah.
And there's some where you're like, I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
This one for me was like that. Because
you wouldn't want to do this one?
It just seemed like so annoying.
Yeah.
To have to step through those things. So it's not the discomfort. It's not the physical discomfort. There is none in this. But I was feeling that way, like, God, because it's not what Jeff kept saying, oh, it's the spacing of them. It wasn't, because you notice there were some where they were spaced properly, but if they were not aligned.
Yeah, if one was not centered on the thing.
Right. So they had to be centered, spaced, and you had to walk through that damn thing every time. Like, that just looked like a thing that was just going to be, it would have just been mind-numbing to me to be like, I don't want to walk through this thing. I don't want to set these up. Like, it was like a weird, irrational, emotional feeling, but I was just like, I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to.
I didn't have that reaction, but to be sure, I feel like, I'm not especially athletically inclined anyway, but this one would really not be in my skill set, because just the the fine coordination and balance and agility of having to step over that frame repeatedly, I feel like I would be just constantly tripping on it and not making any progress at all.
Yeah.
But so yeah, in any case, Julia wins, which good for her, at least in the sense that it saved her from being voted out, and just really upset everybody again. So it's exciting for the episode in that regard.
Oh yeah.
So at this point, Debbie is proposing splitting votes between Ty and Scott, and announces that in front of Julia, which dismays Aubrey, since the whole plan of the split is contingent on them not knowing, not to mention that it also depends on Julia's vote, because without Julia's vote, the other side gets 4 and your split just doesn't work at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, but this is where we kind of talked through already. What that meant is, okay, you don't have the numbers to split, but so what you just need to do is take your solid 5 and just pick one of them. And maybe what you do is you pick the person. So you say to Julia, the split is between these two, say Ty and Scott, and then you vote for Jason.
Yeah, totally agree.
That now, again, it's armchair quarterbacking, right, or armchair survivoring, to say that we can see that from our perspective, but it's also just, I think what it is people just weren't, even if they saw that was a better move collectively, they were all too worried that it would be them to go home if it didn't work perfectly.
Yeah. I don't think I'll ever be on Survivor, but if I am, I'm going to say this now. I want to play like that. Like, I want to be the one where it's like, okay, if we do this and it's the right thing to do, and we get beat and I take it, I feel like I can walk away. Like, I don't have.
I made the right move, and even if it didn't go my way,
they won. You know, we tried. We did this. We were smart about it. We weren't emotional or rational. Like, we said, you know what? Screw this whole splitting votes thing. It's going to mess everything up. We can't trust everybody. Gun for them.
Fortune favors the bold.
Yes, and I got a 1 in 5 chance of being the one they pick. Well, I hope I built better. It's the same thing I said last week. I got to hope I built better relationships with them to be that I'm not the one they pick out of the 5.
Well, and then also,
I feel like if I didn't, I feel like I said that last time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. You've said it, yeah. But I think there's also just the aspect of, even if there is an idol in play, it's not a guarantee that they'll play it. Maybe they'll think that they've figured out what you're really going to do and that they don't have to play it. And so then your plan just works. And nobody on your side goes home. They go home with the idol. That has happened. That is not an impossible thing to happen in this game. No, case study here, they did not play any of the idols. No,
and I think we talked about this again, either last time or another time, where it's like we wanted to go back and look at like what are really the odds here? What are the odds of going home with an idol versus using an idol to get rid of somebody that wasn't expecting it? I can't imagine they're that far different. Like, idols are leverage more than they are useful, you know?
Yeah.
And yes, they have worked, but yes, people have gone home with an idol, you know? And so
they think they're safe, or they want to save it for later. Yeah.
Right. So again, if I was on Survivor, that's the kind of stuff I would research, not like how did Boston Rob play? Because you kind of got that figured out. I would go look at odds so I could convince other people and start looking at, okay, how many times has, looking at it since immunity idols have been in play. How many times has someone used an idol to get rid of somebody? How many times has someone gone home with an idol? How many times have votes been split to get rid of an idol that resulted in a poor response versus when they worked the way they were supposed to?
Yeah.
And like, I would have all those. I would take the time to go figure out all those numbers and come in there and say, and maybe I'd be proven wrong, but if those numbers back what I'm about to say, I would come in there and say, look, this is what we need. Like, gun for the person we want. The odds are in our favor. May the odds forever be in your favor, or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe people wouldn't like that, and then I would have to use the actual social skills of identifying that wasn't working and adapting the plan. But that would be what I would go in with. That would be the plan I would go in with. Is I feel like that just screws things up when everybody starts messing around with that. Like, if you have the number, if you have overwhelming numbers, okay, great.
Yeah. And
you're totally confident. Yeah.
Just case in point, if this time, instead of them all deciding to vote for Debbie, if they wrote off Julia as a lost cause, let's say Julia votes with the guys and we get 4 votes for Sydney, but the rest of them all vote for Scott. Nobody played an idol. Scott goes home.
Except, and there's the way they see it. Except Scott would have played the super idol.
Right. Well, in this case now, yeah. But at the same time, it would be, that's still playing the odds of playing the odds. Well, first of all, though, they gave the super idol to Ty.
Actually, because Ty can say, I play the super idol for Scott, like that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That's still always been the way it works. I was just trying to, okay, never mind. So, but in any case, so let's say that the super idol is still in play. In that case, though, it's still like, so maybe Sydney, doesn't like, but again, it's like Sydney would be unfortunately the one to go home as a result, and so she wouldn't but we have to know what we know now, right? Like, I don't know, it's complicated. So I understand why it's a scary thing
part of the fun
for them to do it, but the problem is that because they weren't willing to take that risk, now all of the idols are still in play and they lost one of their number, and they're much worse situation now than they would have been had Sydney gone home and the idols are out of the picture. Of course, except for Sydney. I mean, obviously, that's worse for her.
Yes, but you brought up another great point, is not all of the idols are in the picture, or are they?
Yeah, we don't know if, because Neil went home with his, but have they re-hidden one?
Right. Nobody's really looked.
Yeah. That could come back into the picture. It's possible.
It could definitely come back into the picture, especially if somebody else other than the Scott, Jason, Ty alliance finds it.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, that Jason does what he ought to do, which is request his idol back officially and have it officially given back to him from Ty, so that they remain with one idol each, with the potential to use a super idol when they want. That would be, if Jason doesn't do that, Jason is not doing the right thing.
Although it's interesting because if Ty is already uncomfortable, there is an aspect to which asking for it back implies distrust.
It does, but they've done what they needed to here. Yeah. They gave Ty, even though it didn't matter which one of them had it, they let Ty have it. That was a good move. They need to take the other one back. Like Jason's got to take it back. Like that, because of the power of the super idol, it cannot reside in one person's decision making. Because, again, we're sitting there and we know that Ty can say, I play this idol for Scott, but he can just as well not say anything.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And so like I understand what you're saying. But the problem is it's the difference between taking the risk that Ty, who is currently loyal to us, is going to stay loyal to us versus...
He has the ring of power. He's not going to stay loyal. He's going to do whatever the hell he wants. You have to take it apart. You have to get it back from him. I am adamant about that.
Okay, but I'm just saying you run the risk of alienating him as a result.
But you don't, because he still needs your half of the idol.
Does he, though? Because he'll have his own single idol. It won't be a super idol, but if he decides that he's going to go with the majority still.
Once. Yeah.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that there is a risk associated with it. It's not a slam dunk because there is a potential cost.
Fair. I'm not arguing that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the degree of risk versus letting one person control the super idol versus maybe kind of upsetting them because you made them give you back something that was yours that you only gave them for the vote that ended up going your way without having to use it. I weigh that risk and you got to take it back.
Yeah.
Now, let's say that happens and another idol is in play. Now we're going to enter into what you were talking about. So someone else from the other alliance finds the idol, realizes Ty doesn't really want to be a part of these guys, and then approaches him and says,
now you could have a super idol with me instead of with them.
Super idol with me, you are no longer tied to them. And then because, yes, they took it back, they did all this, then Ty says, okay, now I can do what I would like. And the power comes back to him and he can make a decision. And if he feels like he was bullied by them, he can choose to do something else. So that's why I thought it was when you were like, oh, well then, if they did this, all the idols would be gone. Well, not necessarily, because we don't know. We don't know. Maybe they don't.
What I mean, at least, is that they would be out of the hands of the people that you're specifically trying to get rid of.
Right. The current idols that are in play in the game would be gone.
Right. 100%. Because the point is that the way it worked out now is that they still lost one of their number and those guys still have the idols.
Yes.
So it's kind of like
a good way for things to go.
Yeah, so of all the possible outcomes, this was like the worst one collectively, like for their group, as opposed to the idea that, to be sure, if, for example, they had succeeded in their plan, but Sydney went home, so like the idols got played, but Sydney went home, that's not the best outcome for Sydney. But that's why it's very much like the prisoner's dilemma, as you called earlier. It's this idea that you're risking your individual outcome for the best betterment of the group, but is that really, how do you do that? It's difficult. But in any case, I think we talked really pretty much about just about everything else, I think. Next time does look like Aubrey's going to try to woo Ty away from Jason and Scott. We'll see how that works out.
Aubrey is not known for excellent execution, so I'm not convinced that's going to happen.
Right. One of the things that was an interesting bit from the Ponderosa video was Debbie kind of ruefully remembering the scene earlier in the season where Aubrey was having a panic attack and Debbie talked her down. It's like, I talked her into staying in the game and now this has happened.
I forgot about that. That's funny.
Yeah. She concludes that it was just sticking up for Julia that made her a target. She doesn't seem to grasp the other aspects of it, but especially since, as we already discussed, the other aspects were partly based on a misread of the situation anyway. It's not unreasonable for Debbie to have not grasped that. But she also still does maintain kind of a low level of self-awareness in terms of how other people are perceiving her. And, you know, with the pressure off there at Ponderosa, it does not slack, meaning she does not talk less at Ponderosa. So there's definitely there's sort of a montage where we have both Nick and Neil kind of making sort of terse comments about how she talks a lot, and it's kind of driving them nuts. And it's just intercut with just Debbie talking a mile a minute about like 15 different subjects in 30 seconds. And it's just, it's kind of funny. So anyway, there wasn't really a lot of strategic talk in this week's Ponderosa, though. Although she does at one point challenge Neil, who we recall was evacuated with his idol. Which, imagine if that were still in the game, in Aubrey's hands. Yeah. And apparently Debbie and Neil had a deal where they promised each other that if they found an idol, they would tell the other, and he never told her about that one. And so he says, he's like, you said you would tell me and you didn't. And he goes, well, I would have told you at an opportune time. And she treats that comment with the respect that it deserves.
That's funny, though.
An opportune time.
I like that. Hedge it.
Yeah. I would have told you. I would have. There wasn't an opportune time. Anyway. But yeah, so we'll see what happens next time. But boy, you know, like there's times on this show where it's exciting because you see a lot of high level players playing well and all trying to outmaneuver each other. And then you see seasons like in episodes like this where everybody is flailing and someone manages to end up on the top of the pile.
Yes.
We'll see if the flailing continues next week.
We will see.
All right. So thank you everybody for watching and or listening. And we will be back next week for the next episode of Survivor Kaoh Rong. Good night, everybody.
Good night.